So I'm on record as saying I expected Venom to be complete crap, because not only is it a Sony movie, but it's from producer Amy Pascal, the mastermind behind the Emoji Movie and Ghostbusters 2016. But Venom wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. It wasn't non-stop product placement like I'd expected, which is really surprising considering it's a Sony film. I mean, there's a couple scattered here and there, but it wasn't very distracting apart from that motorbike. Well, except for the after credits scene where there's a 5-minute advertisement for Into the Spider-Verse, but generally it was fine. Don't get me wrong, the film is terrible, but it's not the 1 out of 10 dumpster fire I was expecting. Don't get me wrong, the film is I've done that bit. It felt very dated, like that bad Incredible Hulk movie from 2008 or Ghost Rider or something. And that's probably because Sony have been trying to make their Venom film since they made their first Spider-Man movie almost 2 decades ago. They had planned a Venom solo film for after Spider-Man 3. When that fell apart, they tried again with the Amazing Spider-Man movies, but as usual, Sony shit the bed. Now they can't even use Spider-Man in their movies and they still insist on making a Venom film. You'd think after so long they'd realise it was a bad idea. If you look at Sony's highest grossing films, all of their Spider-Man movies are at the top, and Venom is a popular character. Sony are just looking for a quick cash grab, and it's so obvious it's just embarrassing at this point. When the film started, I was like, alright, doesn't look as cheap and lazy as I thought it would. Stick that on the poster. Talk about having low expectations. If you're not familiar with the character, Venom is a villain from the Spider-Man comics. At the moment, Sony has loaned out the rights of Spider-Man to the Marvel division of Disney, so Sony have made a film about a Spider-Man villain that has no connection to Spider-Man. You have a villain that is only interesting in the context of his relationship with Spider-Man, but now that villain is in a movie that is not only completely absent of Spider-Man, but in this universe, Spider-Man doesn't exist. I'm going to put up a minor spoiler warning here, I guess. I do talk about a number of things like plot elements and certain character actions, but it's all shown in the trailer. It even has the last scene of the movie in there. Not to mention the film is incredibly formulaic and predictable, and also stupid. But if you really don't want anything spoiled, please come back and watch this later. I'm not talking about anything major, and the film is bad and isn't worth your time anyway, but I thought I'd better say there's minor spoilers ahead. The film opens with a space shuttle coming back to Earth. It's established the symbiotes are easily hurt by fire, yet when they're entering Earth's atmosphere from space, the shuttle is damaged and the entire thing burns up on re-entry. Surely they'd all get burnt to a crisp. Maybe I should just turn my brain off. So we're introduced to Eddie Brock, whom we're told is not only a great journalist but the most popular reporter on the network thanks to some painful exposition, and already the film is in trouble. It's not even remotely believable Tom Hardy is a reporter, let alone the most popular. He acts like a scruffy, incomprehensible drunk most of the time. Don't get me wrong, Tom Hardy is the duct tape holding this garbage together, but it's not believable for a second. You're telling me everyone at this news station is walking around wearing a suit and tie, and for some reason it's fine for their best reporter to be bumbling around, slurring his words in a sweaty hoodie? No. For some reason the film keeps reiterating that Eddie Brock is a loser. His fiancée even says to him that he's a sad loser and she could do better. I understand it's meant to be cute banter, but it comes off making the woman look like an arsehole for thinking her boyfriend is pathetic. And how is Eddie a loser exactly? He's the most popular reporter on his news network and he's brought down a bunch of criminals through his investigations. But sure, he's a loser. Makes perfect sense. So Eddie is assigned to do an interview with the head of a science organisation who had one of their space rockets crash. Why Eddie, the best news reporter at his station, with a reputation for bringing down huge criminal empires, would be sent to write a fluff piece on some shuttle crash is beyond me. And then why does the chairman of that science company agree to have an interview with this guy if Eddie has a reputation for being such an uncompromising reporter? Eddie's fiancée works as a lawyer for the science company, and so he logs onto her computer and digs up some confidential files about criminal activities within the organisation. At the interview, Eddie accuses the chairman of experimenting on people that lead to a lot of unnecessary deaths. The chairman subsequently cuts the interview short. We then find Eddie Brock is immediately fired from his job, and his fiancée is also fired as the lawyer from the science company. It's implied Eddie's fiancée is fired because he used her computer to gain information about her boss. But Eddie had already suspected the company of wrongdoing and simply voiced his concerns. He doesn't explicitly state anything in that interview that would lead them to suspect his fiancée had leaked information. So I'm not sure if she was fired for leaking information or if she was fired because they wanted to destroy Eddie Brock's life and everyone he cares about. It's unclear. This paints Eddie Brock as a completely unlikable arsehole. He is kindly warned multiple times by his boss not to throw around accusations at the interview, and he ignores them. He logs onto his fiancée's laptop and reads private information that results in getting her fired. Possibly. It's unclear. They have a falling out where she accuses him of using her, but his fiancée comes off no better. She puts him down and says she could do better, and in only a few short days after breaking up with Eddie, she already has another guy living with her. Oh, and her new boyfriend is a doctor, just to make Eddie look more like a loser. Both of them are unlikable and gain no sympathy from me at all. What a bunch of assholes. The chairman of the science company is a complete caricature. He seems to love being evil just for the sake of it. He has just found alien life forms. That's a groundbreaking discovery on its own. But for some reason he gets impatient and forces the scientists into performing tests on humans. I mean, I understand you're eager, but what's the rush exactly? No one else has got alien life forms, no one else is performing tests and is going to beat you to the discovery. One of your alien creatures has escaped, so it's probably a good idea to find that and tie up loose ends before you start kidnapping people and forcing them into mad science experiments. But on the other hand, you're eager to start your experiments. I understand, makes perfect sense. His downfall is basically that he rushed into it and there was absolutely no need to. But just so you know he's the bad guy, they have him wantonly waste the lives of his staff. They should have just called him Dr. Evil. Oh, wait, that's taken.
Excellent!
So Eddie Brock sneaks into the science facility. That's it. He just hides in someone's car as they drive in. So uninspired. And for some reason this super secret science facility doesn't even have security cameras installed. And just so you understand how stupid this is, he manages to dodge the one security guard that's doing the rounds in the science facility that's killing people in secret tests on aliens. I personally would have thought they would want slightly stricter security measures. And then Eddie gets infected with the symbiote and escapes. Now it's time for the absolutely terrible scene in the restaurant. I'm just going to skip over that. And then we're into an uninspired action scene where the mercenaries are chasing down Eddie Brock on a motorbike. But they have drones.
Release the drone.
They have these drones fitted with bombs flying all around the city, blowing up cars and presumably injuring people. You would think it's hard to keep a cover on your shady operations when you're blowing stuff up all through the city, but the bad guy doesn't seem to mind. Not once is it brought up by the police or the media. Those drones are completely destroying cars left, right and centre. But somehow when Venom picks up a car door to use as a shield and the drone flies right into it, not only is Eddie completely unharmed, but the car door remains undamaged as well. That's some wildly inconsistent drone bombs you've got there, Mr. Science Man. They've edited the shit out of this, to the point where a lot of the narrative and story elements make no sense whatsoever. The film treats it as a huge reveal when the bad guy turns out to be possessed by a symbiote. It's clearly meant to shock the audience, but they've been showing he was possessed a number of times already. Oh, I don't know, the film's a mess. One of the symbiotes takes over the bad guy so the symbiote can execute the plan the bad guy was already doing anyway. What? How is it when the bad guy gets infected with the symbiote, it's a perfect integration with no problems at all? When it happens to Eddie Brock, it's a complete mess for the rest of the movie. He has trouble controlling himself and not eating everything in sight, and he sweats buckets. The climax of the movie is two identical CGI goo monsters fighting in the dark with lots of quick cuts. It's a complete mess and almost impossible to tell what's going on moment to moment. I want to talk about that awful mid-credits scene, so I'm going to put up a spoiler warning. I don't think there's much to spoil, and the scene is so crap I don't even think it's worth waiting through the credits to see, but just in case, skip to this time code to avoid spoilers. It's nothing more than cheap sequel bait that rivals The Predator on pure stupidity. So the scene opens with Eddie Brock walking into a prison and we see a shadowy figure huddled in the cell. Cut to a close-up of Woody Harrelson performing some kind of psychopath impersonation that gives Jesse Eisenberg from Batman v Superman a run for his money. The acting is awful and that wig is even worse. That stupid fucking wig. It looks like a cow took a shit on his head.
Oh no, this is horrible!
I started to warm to some of the banter between Eddie Brock and the Venom symbiote, but before I had time to start enjoying it, the film was over. And the Venom character has very little screen time. Most of it's in the trailer. The action scenes are incredibly dull. They mostly consist of Tom Hardy flailing around like Jack Sparrow while some CGI goo shoots out of his body and attacks people. No, not that type of goo. I know you were thinking it. You disgust me. I've been aware of some people complaining that Venom was initially promised to be R-rated, but just before it was released it was downgraded to PG-13. Here in the UK it was rated a 15, which is the equivalent of an R rating in America. I suspect that's down to the UK having slightly tighter age rating restrictions than the US. To be frank, I do think the film suffered slightly from a lower age rating. At several points Venom bites people's heads off, but it's so obscured and cut so quickly you can barely see it at all, and it's completely bloodless. Later in the film you see Venom get ready to eat someone, but it cuts away to a woman's reaction, and when it cuts back it's just Tom Hardy standing there. Don't get me wrong, the film is totally flawed and changing the age rating wouldn't fix these fundamental problems, but it would be a small help with some of the jarring edits. There's an inconsistency where the characters are talking about biting heads off, but we don't really get to see it properly. Sure, it's there, but it's so quick, if you blink you'll miss it. And I'm not one of those people that believe a Venom movie needs to have a high age rating. I don't think there's any particular need for it. The Ultimate Spider-Man comic run did a great version of Venom that would have been fairly tame in the violence and gore aspect. I don't think a Venom movie needs a high age rating, but in this case they clearly filmed it for a higher rating and then shoddily cut it down, and it shows. It was nice that they changed the pronunciation of symbiote. In the trailer they say symbiote or something.
We call them symbiotes.
But they say it normally in the film. I didn't really like the Venom design, it felt off to me. I've heard some people say it's the perfect representation of the comics, and sure, fine. It's nice that you feel that way and I'm glad you liked it. Although it is worth mentioning that Venom has been depicted in a lot of different ways over the years. Does anyone remember that Venom comic that started off as a rip-off of The Thing, then threw in some Men in Black and a bunch of clones, and ended up as some kind of story about Noah's Ark? I'm not making that up, am I? I'm sure that was it. I can't put my finger on what I didn't like about the Venom design exactly. Maybe it was the fake CGI-ness of it all. It never felt real in the slightest. Some of the effects were shockingly poor. It was like something from one of those crappy Blumhouse horror movies. And the stretchy gooey nature of the symbiote just looked goofy in live action. Venom's head shape was a little off, and the proportions they chose for his body were a really weird direction to go in. He had these huge bulging shoulders with these long spindly legs, and his skin looked like shiny rubber. It was hard to pick out any details beside that stringy white stuff all over him. He looked like a wet bin bag drizzled in mayonnaise. I spend a lot of time doing arty stuff, so I understand this might not be a big problem for everyone, but suffice it to say, when I first saw the Venom character I didn't immediately go, yes, that's perfect. Perhaps it's in part to the fact that Venom doesn't have his signature logo on his torso, so it throws off the balance of the character in terms of where it draws your eye and areas of interest. There's also some weird anatomy choices. For example, at one point Venom opens his mouth really wide, but for some reason the top of his head lifts up. That's not how a jaw works. The jawbone is the part that moves, not the skull. When you open your mouth, you don't tilt your head back, you lower your jaw. I understand it's an alien goo monster, but it's still kind of weird to see. Removing Spider-Man from the Venom origin story leaves too many holes in the narrative that this story fails to plug. Honestly, I think it's a shame that Venom hasn't been pulled over to the MCU. I'm not a Disney or MCU fanboy or anything. I'd probably only describe half of the MCU movies I've seen as actually being good, but Marvel consistently get those character designs spot on, and the whole alien goo monster from outer space would feel more at home in the MCU, where they've spent time world building with lots of aliens and space adventures. When it comes to giving films a point score, if I've just seen the film and then immediately make a review, I have a tendency to rate it slightly higher than I think it deserves. I enjoy the cinema going experience most of the time, but after I've had a week to think about it and let it settle, I would usually rate it slightly differently. For example, I gave The Predator a 3 or possibly 4 out of 10, but it should really be a 3, possibly a 2 out of 10. With that said, I think it's fair to give Venom a 3 out of 10. It's messy in almost every aspect. The movie feels so dated, it's like something from the late 90s. The characters are unlikable and go undeveloped, the story is formulaic, there's an excess of continuity errors, the editing was choppy in a few areas, the action scenes felt very underwhelming, and it ends with a haphazard CGI fight fest. But worst of all, it's completely, utterly, soul-crushingly boring. Thank you for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.